would like to take the opportunity to discuss my favorite albums of all time. This list has remained practically the same for a bunch of years, so I think that this is a group of albums that will continue to influence and heal me as time goes on. This is not a conventional list. 4 albums tie together as first place. Believe me, I've tried ranking them and making them chronological, and I just can't. In fact, I'm not even going to rank these. I'm just going to go way out of order on these, because trying to pick one over another to me is kind of like picking a favorite kid. 2 Death albums are in my list, The Sound of Perseverance and Symbolic. To me, Death just got better as they went along. I love the early stuff, but the later stuff speaks to me more. It's like they've retained the heaviness, but turned the musicianship and songwriting factors up a notch. In the case of Symbolic, this is an album that's full of atmosphere, technicality, brutality, and a bunch of different aspects of metal. The songwriting showed highly skilled musicianship from everyone involved, but it also created ambience. Each song can stand on its own and fit a variety of moods. I just get so pumped when I hear Misanthrope, and it's hard not to be drawn into the world of Symbolic with songs like Perennial Quest and Crystal Mountain. It's like Chuck and the band were trying to go for this empowering vibe. And that's what this album is. It's very empowering, but it's also extremely heavy and extremely well written and just beautifully crafted. Everyone seems to have a different favorite Death album. My personal favorite is The Sound of Perseverance. I like it more than Symbolic, but only slightly more. It's progressive metal at its best. Some people don't like Chuck's vocals here, but I find them enjoyable. I like how empowered the album feels, but I also love how tight and technical everybody is. Every song on here is just a masterpiece, and I really love the quiet section and Flesh and the Power It Holds. You know, the bow no. It's so creepy and cold and diabolical. And these lyrics, it's like Chuck became a warrior. Well, he already was, but even more so here. Now, the best time to listen to The Sound of Perseverance is in cold weather. The first time I heard this album, it was on Christmas Day. It was really snowy outside from a snowstorm that happened a few days before. So I was listening to this album, and then Voice of the Soul came on, and somehow the setting just clicked. Anyway, the song just blew my mind. I always said that this song would be played at my funeral if I have one, and it'll also be played at my wedding if I have one. Awesome album, front to back, definitely a masterpiece. Bad Brains Self-Titled. This album was so fast for 1982. Some people prefer the other 80s Bad Brains albums because of their better production and their thrashiness, but this album to me is just what punk should sound like. It's an album that just doesn't get old. Of course, there are also the reggae songs. Oh man, I absolutely adore them. It's a perfect punk album, but it's also got some brilliant friggin' reggae songs on it too. It would have been the last thing you would expect from a punk band in the 70s and 80s. It's like they were trying to sound angry and loud, but they also took the time to be dynamic and soulful. It's like the album is chaotic and pissed when it needs to be, but it's also relaxing and full of soul sometimes. I plan on throwing huge, loud, crazy metal parties, while Band in DC and I are playing in the background. And then you have songs like Leaving Babylon and I Love Ijah, which are great for just sitting on the porch, watching the ocean, and relaxing to. It's an album that brings a smile to my face every time I think about it. Nausea Extinction. Classic New York crust with dueling male and female vocals. Of course the amoebics and other crust influences are there, but Nausea has a sound of their own. It's like they combine thrash metal and reggae sometimes. You know, the reggae being on songs like Sacrifice. Amy is really sexy. I just love that look on a woman. But the drumming is pretty complicated and hardcore for this style of music, especially considering that Nausea were part of the squatting community in New York. This band managed to exhume some brilliant tunes with little equipment and money. I also enjoy how 90s it sounds sometimes with songs like Self-Destruct. On this album, you will hear unadulterated punk ideology with the clever lyrics. It's punky, but it also sounds heavy and huge. This has become a hard album to find, but you will be glad that you found it when you get your hands on it. Disrupt's Unrest kind of has the same situation as Nausea's Extinction. You'll get the full-on punk ideology. Every element of punk that exists is there. The samples, the politics, the veganism. But the production is very powerful, and the drummer is one of the tightest sounding drummers in the genre. Actually, this album combines metal and punk in a perfect 50-50. Sometimes it's a little difficult to determine what genre it is. Sometimes it sounds like crust, sometimes it sounds like hardcore punk, sometimes it sounds like grindcore, sometimes it sounds like thrash metal. It's really catchy with songs like A Life's a Life and Religion is a Fraud, and they all have really catchy and really well-written riffs. The guitar riffs will stay in your head for a while, but the different vocalists are also really pleasant to hear. You have deep, growly vocals, but then you also have high-pitched screams that sound like a 12-year-old kid getting highly pissed. Even the bonus tracks are killer. Definitely a highly recommended album. Dystopia's The Aftermath is like a more polished punk and technical version of Human Equals Garbage. It's not as dirty, but it's just as addicting, and every aspect of the band is as strong as it ever was. Songs like Self-Defeating Prophecy are about how you can get lost and depressed if you think too much about life and the negative aspects of it. Then you have songs like Socialized Death Sentence, which is about the dangers and the hazards of the workplace. Actually, Socialized Death Sentence was the first song I ever heard by Dystopia. I immediately fell in love with how sewery and sludgy and grimy it sounded. It sounded urban and rough, and the music was just fulfilling. The whole album's a life changer. Dystopia, of course, does their mix of sludge, crust, and doom metal like always, but there's also an instrumental song which will give you a spiritual awakening if you listen at the right moment. Some people like this album more than Human Equals Garbage, but I like that album slightly more just because of how dirty it sounds. Either album is a masterpiece, though. Nine Inch Nails have a couple places on the list, too. I've already done a full-fledged video on Pretty Hate Machine, so I'll just sum it up and say that I love how dark and personal it is. Every song is different, they sound as accessible and obscure as they want. You have powerful songs like Head Like a Hole and Sin, which are really addicting, and then you have the schizophrenia of Kinda I Want To and the numbness of Something I Can Never Have. It's like a mix of synth-pop, industrial, and EBM, but with enough rock influences to make it listenable for the average listener. You know, somebody who's not into industrial bands like Throbbing Gristle or Skinny Puppy. Like, maybe it's not as dark or disturbing as those, but it's easier to listen to. On to the next, I like The Downward Spiral more. This album gave me nightmares when I first heard it. I was about 12 at the time, and I just wasn't used to hearing music as dark as this. Like, Mr. Self-Destruct and Reptile were scary to listen to. And so was The Downward Spiral's The Bottom remix. It's an album where I'll mean to listen to just one song, but then I'll end up listening to several or the rest of the album. It's like each song has a different goal or a different sound, but somehow they flow together seamlessly. It's all strongly written and full of different emotions. Hurt dynamically closes the album. It's like a calm after the storm. Lyrically, the message is that everybody in your life will leave you at some point or another. I love how layered this album sounds, and I also enjoy how I hear new things every time I listen to this album. It has everything I want to hear from Nine Inch Nails. It's angry and loud when it wants, but it's also quiet and wistful when it wants. It's the perfect balance of industrial, keyboards, guitars, rock, metal, a whole bunch of other genres. It's an album in its own class. Brain Oil's self-titled. This album is an anomaly. It's short. It's 23 minutes long, but I never want it to end. There are 7 songs, and they're all addicting, catchy, and insanely heavy. The bass is rumbly and distorted, but I absolutely love the drum sound. It's snappy and full of punch. Meanwhile, Nate and Greg's vocals are screechy and powerful. This is what happens when you mix hardcore punk vocals with metal vocals. They're high-pitched, but they'll still pack a punch. Not every moment is loud, though. You have the occasional acoustic guitars and palm-muted riffs, and that makes everything heavier when it goes to full blast. Of course, the riffs are doom metal and blues influenced, but they're so fun to play and they're fun to hear. I can't get enough of them. These riffs will stay in your head all day after you've listened to them. Inquisition and One Leaf Untouched are pure stoner and superhero anthems. Just imagine Iron Man flying away into the distance with Inquisition playing. Skinny Puppy, Les writes, I enjoy it more than Too Dark Park, just by a little bit. It's an album in its own class. It must have been really difficult to write and come up with ideas on what was going to be done. It's more drug-addled than the rest of their catalog, but it's also calmer, too. Everything is just so unconventional. Of course, you have really gripping songs like Love in Vain and Mirror Saw. Those are some of the easiest ones to listen to. Just listen to Lust Chance. There are all kinds of stuttering effects and weird splices everywhere. Usually, I really hate noise tracks. I usually hate them with a passion. I find them to be a waste of time and a waste of space. However, I don't mind download. Actually, I welcome it. I think it's an interesting listen. Especially if you're feeling defeated or in need of deep thought. Even the artwork's just cool to look at. It's easy to just turn on a song and let it play. And for my first place, there are 4 albums. Entombed Left Hand Path, Dystopia Human Equals Garbage, Autopsy Mental Funeral, and Terrorizer's World Downfall. It's really hard to rank all of these because they're all so magical, but they're so different. They all belong in their own classes. I'll never forget the first time I heard World Downfall. I put my headphones on, and right from the get-go, I was running in circles in my yard, and I managed to break a few things in the process. I just felt absolutely pummeled! It was when I was just getting into grindcore, and when Fear of Napalm came on, I was thinking, wow, he's a really good drummer. This is Pete Sandoval's best drum performance ever. And to think that this came out in 1989, this was before there were drum triggers, and this was before, time aligning the drums became a thing. It's like there are drum fills everywhere. Everyone is just playing their hearts out. Dave Vincent's bass is distorted and groovy. Oscar Garcia's vocals are mean as hell. And Jesse Pintado's riffs and guitar sound, it's heavy and it's full of punch. And there are no guitar solos. There doesn't need to be. It's a simple album. It just blows my mind every single time I listen to it. Now, an album like Mental Funeral is hard to come by. I have never heard an album that sounded like this, ever. It's wet, slimy, fuzzy, and wretched, but it's hard to describe. You'll just have to hear this album for yourself. Sometimes things sound like they're in the background, like on a 70s Black Sabbath album. But other times, such as on songs like Bonesaw, everything is up front and in your face. But the production adds to how grim, gory, and slimy it is. Chris and Eric's vocals are full of pain, and I honestly believe that they became mutants during these recording sessions. Danny's solos are squealy as ever, and Chris's drumming is unpredictable and nuts. You have classic songs such as Hole in the Head and In the Grip of Winter. Very creepy stuff. But even the end of the album is very creepy. It's a 30-second instrumental acoustic guitar track, and it sounds like an insane person after he just listened to Origin. It's mystifying. I can't imagine what it was like to hear this album in 1991. I've already made a video on Entombed, so I'll just keep my opinion on Left Hand Path kind of short. It's an album that doesn't get old. It combines a bunch of different styles and sounds, but it's full of zest. And the fact that it was written by a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds just blows my mind. Everyone is energized, and every song is a masterpiece, even the bonus tracks. The guitar sound, courtesy of the Boss HM2, is one of the goriest things you will ever hear. But LG is growling his guts out. The vocals are out of this world. He's a huge influence. And just the way it's produced, you'll hear something new every time you listen to it. You'll hear an extra crash cymbal hit. You'll hear extra guitar picks and amplifier sounds from one of the speakers. You might hear an echo you haven't noticed on one of the guitars. It's totally layered. This album has stood the test of time perfectly. I've mentioned a few times that Human Equals Garbage was one of my favorite albums, so I'll try to keep it a little short. Every song is different. It's all sludgy, grimy, depressing, heavy, and addicting. Dino's drumming style is really interesting. It's like he can play all kinds of different metal and punk. He can sound as complex as he needs to be, but he can also give as many fills as needed in any genre. But he also screams and growls while drumming, and that takes talent. There's something joyful about hearing his voice. It's full of pain, but it's also going at full blast the whole time. Mouse also has some really interesting vocals. It's like it provides a different perspective within the songs. Every musician is interesting to hear, and that includes Todd. A lot of times his bass lines are totally different from what the guitars are doing. He is definitely an exception to rule number 2. I love how dirty the album sounds. I like the lyrics and the packaging too. It's all insightful. You'll definitely be using your head when you read the lyrics. Absolutely wonderful. There are a bunch of albums I would like to give an honorary mention to, but these I've just discussed are my primary favorites. Thank you for watching.